arc of a man's life is the imprint and impact of a trail that he leaves for others to follow in order to achieve their highest level of ascendance and perseverance. And for Mark Herschberg, he's certainly doing his part to live up to that very creed and leaving an example we all can follow. He's the author of the Career Toolkit, Essential Skills for Success That No One Taught You. He also helped to launch the Undergraduate Practice Opportunities Program, dubbed MIT's Career Success Accelerator, a place where he's taught for more than 2 decades. He joined me this week to talk about career advancements, STEM careers, his book, and so much more. I'm Kevin McShann. Let's have this conversation. Mark, if you're ready, I'll welcome you to the program, and I'm excited to talk about your new book, your career in helping people find their careers and everything in between. Great to be with you this afternoon, and thanks so much for being here.
Fantastic. Thank you for having me.
Mark, I'm wondering if we could start today's conversation by sort of giving you a chance to give our viewers a 360-degree view of your career and professional life, because I know it's spanned a lot of different industries and a lot of different interests, from helping to get criminals off the dark web and to help people finding their perfect career. So I'm wondering if we could start just by asking you to give us a 360-degree view of your life and the person you are today.
Yeah, I've had some twists and turns in my own career. I started off as a software developer when I came out of MIT back in the 1990s and began doing tech startups. I've done traditional startups of a handful of people to large Fortune 500 companies who have wanted to play startup. And throughout that portion of my career, I've grown in my own development and moved on to become a head of engineering and then a CTO. So I've been a chief technology officer for probably the past 10, 15 years or so. That's a fairly standard career path I had. But along the way, I discovered something interesting. When I would try to hire people, whether it was in technology and marketing in any field, if I asked them a question about their domain, they could usually give me an answer. And it told me, okay, they've studied this, they know what they're doing. But when I would ask them a general question about leadership, about teamwork, about communications, I'd get a blank stare. And I realized this is true. It wasn't just for myself, because I had a shortcoming in this early in my career and had to learn my own, but it's true for all of us. Because if you think back to what you learned in college, whatever your major was, they didn't really focus on these other skills. We've all heard networking is so important, and yet no one bothered to teach it to us. So I began to explore this. At the same time, MIT was putting together a program to start to teach this. I got involved in developing that program, and we wound up, I've been teaching there now for 20 years. That also led to the book. So I've had this parallel path. As much as I care about technology and building great tech startups, I also care about helping people get the most out of their careers, which includes teaching them all the skills we've heard are important, but no one bothered to teach us.
And you mentioned it in your last answer. I'm wondering, because I know that you were one of the founding members of MIT's Career Success Accelerator program, and you had mentioned that you have taught there now for over 2 decades. I'm wondering the evolution of the program, why you thought it was a good idea to get started, and the imprint it's had as well.
Yeah, really good question. When I went to MIT, networking was a four-letter word. It was considered dirty. And it's because MIT is such a meritocracy. We're so good at, look, whoever did the best on the test, whoever got the best grades, they're clearly better. And we really did respect people purely for their intellectual capacity. But what that did to the culture is it said, well, these other skills aren't important. And in fact, the whole concept of networking, let's suppose you and I are both trying to get the same job, and I have better grades than you do. So we'd think, okay, well, I should get the job. That's the MIT way. I'm smarter, I have better grades. But in fact, you know the CEO's son. You've been best friends since you guys were 5 years old. You're like, Kevin, I should have gotten that job, but Kevin stole it from me because he's good friends with the CEO's son. And that's one way to look at. But another way is to say, the CEO has known you now since you were 5. The CEO has known you. You've been to his house. He saw you grow up. He knows that you are responsible. He knows that you are hardworking. He knows that you get along well with others. Those are all things we look for in candidates. They're all valid. And through that network relationship, he has that deeper information on you. And yeah, maybe my test scores were slightly higher, but he's thinking, yeah, it's not just about the smartest person, it's all these other skills. And so what we need to do is change that mentality from it's just about whoever has the best grades to it's a lot of these skills and they all come together. So that's why we started this program, and we've seen MIT culture shift. And within MIT, and certainly I think within the world at large at the same time, we began to recognize these soft skills, power skills, whatever you want to call them, they are so important in who we hire and how we develop ourselves. I think we've had a real transformation.
And Mark, I'm curious to follow up with this question in terms of the education system has sort of evolved over the years, and a 4-year degree isn't necessarily for everyone. And I'm curious to get your thought on the evolution of apprenticeships, internships, and trade schools as well, and the impact that it's had on students' ability for advancement as well.
You've hit on one of the passions of mine, which is that we have to transform the education system. About 10 years ago, I was involved in a program in New York City where we were taking people who lost their jobs due to the Great Recession. And we knew it wasn't just wait for the economy to turn around and they'll get the jobs back. Their jobs were gone. They were never coming back. So we had to take people in their 30s, 40s, 50s, even 60s, and transition them to a new industry, to a new type of job, not just the same job at a different company. We as a society aren't set up for that. You can't take someone who's 55 and say, go back to school for 4 years. It's not cost effective. They can't even afford to take that time off. We need to do a couple different things in our society. First, we need to recognize people will be doing these transitions a couple times throughout their career. So we need to do learning that happens after age 22, including some intensive periods that might be 3, 6, 9 months, maybe every 10 years or so, where people really do skill up as their industries start to change. Now, you also asked about apprenticeship and about non-college professions. So in this program, we actually, the key learning, we did have some classroom time, but was getting them into apprenticeships. We had interns who were in their 50s going off to companies. And I really think that was helpful. The companies got good labor who had other skills and other experience and seniority. They got practical experience. But I think college in general, unfortunately, is overused. Now, if you want to get a PhD, if you want to get deep knowledge in an area, yes, do it. But for so many people who go on and they might become an executive assistant, they might become a manager of a retail store, great jobs, but a college degree isn't the best way to spend your time and money to prepare for that. In fact, we need to train more people in vocational jobs. I don't mean the classic air conditioning repair, but rather with the practical skill set. So if you're going to go and run a small retailer, you should know a little bit of marketing, a little bit of accounting, a little bit of HR, learn some of this, learn whatever the industry you might be in. That's going to be much more effective than you had some Roman history, some English, one semester of math. That's not going to give you the right skill set to be successful in the career you chose.
And you talk about vocational careers, Mark, and as you know, I have a passion for working with individuals with disabilities because one of the mantras that I live my life by is inclusion is the gateway to independence. So I'm wondering your thoughts on how vocational education and careers can open up doors for people with disabilities as well.
Yeah, I talk about in the book how we really need that diversity of experience. I give the example of Temple Grayson. And for those not familiar, she has a rather severe form of autism. Now, classically, people would say, oh, she's autistic. You know, that's not someone who's going to be effective in society. We don't want her involved. But in fact, she went on, she got a PhD in animal welfare. And what her autism allowed her to do was see things the rest of us could not. When she went into slaughterhouses, she would discover the noise, the lighting, it would terrify the animals. Now, most of us, we go into a noisy place, we go into a place where you've got lots of light and dark spots. We go, okay, well, this is it. I'm going to learn to tune out the noise. Because of her autism, it was not easy for her to tune out that noise. And so that made her more aware, and she identified issues that the rest of us were effectively blind to. And it's because she had that different perception, that different mental model. All of us have unique experiences and backgrounds and just ways we engage with the world. And so for companies to be effective, they need that diversity. Yes, we need diversity in terms of race and gender and all of those roles. That's very important, but also diversity in terms of our experiences and capabilities, including those with disabilities. And they can really bring something to the table in some unique perspectives that might not be as obvious to the rest of us.
And you also say that there's a way to bridge the divide between technology and business. So I'm wondering if you could share some insight there as well.
So this goes to how we need to improve our communications. Now, communication is a broad topic. There's lots of books on, and they all have great advice. The approach I take is really at a fundamental level. We speak different languages. You've probably at some point encountered someone who's highly technical and they throw out a bunch of buzzwords, say, I don't understand any of this, right? And it's because they're using a language and they're using a set of references and mental models that other people haven't been trained in. You might have experienced this, say, with a medical professional as well, or even your accountant who's throwing in a bunch of terms that you're not familiar with. And so all of us have that unique knowledge. We all have that domain experience, that domain knowledge and vocabulary that others don't. And we lose people when we stick to that vocabulary, when we stick to that mental model that people in our discipline have. So something that all of us can do, from business to technology, but really across any disciplines, is to recognize we have a certain mindset, we have a certain language, we have a certain set of patterns that we can use within our discipline, but when we speak to people outside of it, we need to do that translation for them to make it easier for them to understand the point we're trying to get across.
And Mark, I want to know all about the book you wrote, the Career Toolkit, trying to give people the essential tools to success that nobody told them about. So I'm wondering if we could talk a little bit about your book and the message that you were hoping to convey.
Yeah, in this book, it comes from the teaching at MIT, and the topics that we have there weren't just picked arbitrarily. It's from corporations who for decades have said, these are the skills we want to see that we're not getting. It comes from my having run an online community of a couple 100,000 people, comes from some of my volunteer work. So it's a lot of sources. This isn't just Mark said, I think we should do this. It really comes from field tested input from corporate America. And so the skills that we discuss in the book, how to create an effective career plan, how to be effective at work, managing your manager, fitting into corporate culture, how to interview people. There's so much content on how to interview as a candidate, but many of us have to interview other people, hire them to our team. We never talk about that. Then we get to leadership, management, communication, networking, negotiations, and importantly, ethics. So I cover each of these topics. The key thing in here, because there's of course books on each of these topics, entire books, not just chapters, but the key thing is about changing your mental model, changing that perception of how to approach it. And if you can do that shift, you're already on the right track. You'll begin to get some actionable tips from the book, but then you can explore further. And on the website and in the book, I explain how you can take additional steps to continue your development in the area.
And Mark, you've mentioned a couple of times already this afternoon about the power of networking. So I'm curious to get your perspective on what do you think is the key to effective networking and getting where you want to get to in your career through networking?
Unfortunately, most people think of networking as simply adding connections, right? Getting business cards, saying, oh, I have all these followers on social media. Adding someone on LinkedIn and saying they're in your network, it's a lot like saying someone who swiped right on you on Tinder is now your significant other, right? You're not suddenly in a relationship just because you both swiped right. Now, what happens if you both swipe right? You say, okay, there's some interest, but what do? You build that relationship. The same is true for our business relationships. So yes, you meet the person, you get his or her business card, or you do connect on LinkedIn, but now you have to build that relationship. And that involves spending time together, whether in person or online these days, getting to know the person, building that trust. Because at the end of the day, what's our network good for? It's good for someone presenting trust or providing credibility. If you needed to borrow $10,000, who's going to give it to you? Is it someone who you just added on LinkedIn yesterday? Or is it someone who you've known for 20 years? And while we don't want to think of our networks purely in terms of money, that does illustrate the point that we can ask for more from people where we have that deeper relationship, that longer established trust. And that's what we want to get out of our networking relationships.
And I'm curious to ask you also, with so many people doing these virtual meetings because of the pandemic, I'm curious to get your perspective on how we restore the value of the human connection once COVID is over.
I'm not opposed to virtual interactions. I am opposed to people who think, oh, I go into a room, there's 7 other people at this virtual event, I got their contact info, and now I'm networked with them. In fact, we can use virtual interactions to really foster our networks in a way we don't do as well in person. So consider, one of the things I've said is you need to build up that relationship. You need to spend time with someone. Typically, we do that by saying, oh, Kevin, why don't we meet for coffee next week, right? But if you're doing that, you're doing it probably with someone who's in the same city, so you can both meet for coffee. Someone who's hundreds or thousands of miles away, think, well, next time I'm in town, I'll reach out. And certainly a year or two ago, if I had said, oh, Kevin, let's do a virtual coffee. Let's both get on Zoom and have a virtual coffee. You would have said, what are you talking about? But we're now more used to it. And so doing virtual interactions for people far away, I think is useful. It's something we've shifted in a positive way that we can build these relationships that might be more remote. But to your point, I think once we're back, first we're all starved for in-person interaction. I think we're all going to avoid online videos for a period of a couple months this summer when hopefully the vaccine's fully rolled out. And we are going to get, I think, a deeper interaction from that in person. I do have relationships with people who I've known only through online communities for many years, but still they get built faster and it feels deeper when you have some in-person interaction somewhere along the way.
And Mark, I know that you have a Bachelor of Science degrees in both physics and electrical engineering. So I'm curious to get your thoughts on how we get more young people interested in STEM careers.
This is a big challenge. I think we have made some headways. Growing up in the 80s, who were the role models for my peers when I was in elementary school? Typically, it was sports stars, it was pop musicians. And so those were the celebrities, right? Actors and athletes. And now kids are growing up and who do they see as celebrities? They see Bill Gates, Mark Zuckerberg. They see lots of people who have built tech companies, and that has shifted people more towards tech. So I'm glad to see that. Their parents being more tech savvy, right? My parents didn't grow up with computers, but kids today, their parents grow up using computers. And so I think there's a little more exposure to it, but we still want to encourage students to develop these skills. Even if you don't want to go into a STEM field, We need to get students who understand learning math is important. Learning science is important. So you understand that vaccines are safe and why we need to use them. And we especially have this gap with women dropping out of STEM. I've seen different theories as to why, but no clear, this is why we're losing women in STEM. But I would encourage everyone who engages with children, promote science, show them the cool, fun pieces of science. One thing I especially try to do, if you look at how we teach math early in school, we're just teaching them rote memorization, and we never teach them why this matters or what fun things you can do with it. I think that's a turnoff to kids. So any adults, when you engage with children, please show them what is fun and exciting about STEM skills.
And let me follow up with this question, Mark, in terms of getting more women engaged and implanted into STEM careers. What do you think is a targeted approach that people in the field can take and that we can all take to get more women involved in the industry as well?
For one thing, we need to show more female role models. And I think we're making strides. A friend of mine, Dr. Kelly Corrick, she just moved over from Smithsonian to NASA. There's a statue of her in, I believe, a Texas airport showing off women in science and showing young girls, look, here are women. They look just like you, and they're leaders in science. They're leaders in STEM. I think goes a long way. We still have a lack of women in technology, women leading top tech companies, founders or leaders. They get funded less than males. And I think if we can adjust that, we're going to create more role models for young women. But of course, they don't have to necessarily be the CEO. If we can just show young women today, here are women in STEM fields. You can be just like this woman here. I think that's going to open up the pathways.
And Mark, I'm curious to ask you about your own personal legacy or the imprint you would like to leave on the world. How do you want your life to be remembered or defined?
I hope to be remembered as a loving husband and father, someone who was a leader in his field, but equally importantly, someone who had a positive impact on the world. In Judaism, we have this philosophy of repairing the world. We all have to leave the world better than we found it. And so I hope through the nonprofit work that I do, through things like this teaching and the book, and just going out and helping people with their career skills, I can help lots of people have a better, more effective life and have a positive impact on the world.
And as you know, that the COVID pandemic has affected all of us in terms of mental health and sort of mental well-being. I'm curious to know how you think the pandemic has made your family connection stronger and your ability to connect with those who are closest to you.
It's been challenging for me. I was already fairly close with my family, and so I used to see them more often. With elderly parents, I've been more hesitant to go and see them. Thankfully, they just got their second shot, and so in another week or two, I'm going to be going and seeing them much more often. I do think for both myself and all of us in general, having this effective time apart, right? Having this time where you're told you can't see each other, you can't spend that time together, we're all going to appreciate it more when we come back. I think and certainly hope that post-COVID, we're going to really appreciate our in-person relationships with friends and family on a much deeper level now that we know what happens when we miss it. And hopefully that will have a net positive effect on the world.
I've got two more questions for you. And the first, as you know, is that President Biden is pushing for a $15 minimum wage. And I'm wondering your thoughts on the impact that'll have on both employers and those receiving the increased wages as well.
I am definitely in favor of this because when you look at what minimum wage has been over the years, it has not kept up with inflation. And it's considered to be one of the drivers of what's creating our wealth inequality in our society here in the US. Unfortunately, there are secondary effects. We've seen certain organizations that really, it's going to hurt their margins. So I think it was HEB, it was some supermarket chain, just said the hazard pay that Washington State wanted to add, it was a couple dollars an hour. This was pushing it, I believe, above minimum wage because they already have $15 minimum wage. They said this hazard pay just makes it impractical for us to run supermarkets. And realistically, if you look at supermarket chains, they run on extremely thin margins. So I think we will see certain companies say, when you move to that $15 an hour, I am going to start to outsource this more. But that's an immediate effect. I think we're going to see outsourcing more in general, as well as automation. And this goes to a larger issue that we have in society. Raising the minimum wage is good, is the right thing to do. But what we also have to do as jobs continue to disappear, whether from automation or outsourcing, or because of the ROI on employing at that price, we as society, led by the government, but in partnership with corporate American education, need to have continual education programs so people can retrain. And as their jobs start to become less economically viable, we retrain them for something else. This has certainly happened to toll booth collectors, right? We've gotten rid of them. We've gotten rid of the milkmen. Now that all happened over a long period, and it happened to a small number of people. But as, for example, we see drivers start to, automated cars taking away taxi drivers and Uber drivers, as we see other roles disappear, government and society needs to step in, because it's going to happen to a lot of people quickly. They need to step in and help retrain them, getting them into new jobs and new careers so they can be productive members of society.
And Mark, my final question for you is, if people want to buy the book or get connected with you personally, how can they do that, bud?
You can buy the book on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, local bookstores, pretty much anywhere. You can go to my website, thecareertoolkitbook.com, to see where to buy it, to learn more about the book, to download the free app that goes along with the book, so it helps reinforce the lessons. Because I know when I read a book like this, I forget all 3 weeks later. It's also useful to have in your pocket, because if you do go into a networking event or negotiating event, you can pull it out and quickly flip through all the tips to get a crash course. And then there's a whole bunch of other resources on the website as well. And of course, you can get in touch with me. All of this at thecareertoolkitbook.com.
Mark, I thoroughly enjoyed our time together and engaging in conversation with you about career diversity, technology, business, your career arc, and so much more. I want to thank you for your valuable insights and perspectives, and for being here this afternoon. It's most appreciated.
Thank you for having me. This has been a wonderful conversation.